Okay, I'm going to start letting people in and I'll start the introduction, okay? Shalom Lekulam. Hello everyone. Welcome to the latest of the Zoom events at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all. Some familiar faces, some new people here. That's great. We've been doing these now for several months, pretty much since we returned from the first of Israel's COVID lockdowns in May, when we realized that we weren't able to continue with events at the center itself. And we now have a very regular and diverse series of offerings on Zoom, including every Wednesday an English event with me. And we've had a number of different speakers and lecturers and discussions on a variety of topics around Israeli history and Zionism, contemporary politics, contemporary Israeli society, the Jewish world. And we started last week a new series based on a speech given by President Rubi Rivlin, who's stepping down as president this year. A speech he gave in 2015, in which he referred to 4 tribes in Israel: the secular Jews, Ultra-Orthodox Jews, religious Zionist Jews, and the Arab population. And he bemoaned the fact that they are very much separate in Israeli society, that they're divided, that there is, I'm going to just quote from the speech briefly, that there is mutual ignorance and a lack of common language between them, and that they even have a different outlook regarding the basic values and desired character of the state of Israel. Now that was 5 years ago. We can judge for ourselves, firstly, whether we agree with him and also whether we think anything's changed in the intervening 5 years. But what we wanted to do here was to bring speakers representing, as much as anyone, one person can represent a community, those 4 sectors, and to hear from them and to give you an opportunity to ask them questions. So last week we had Uri Kedar talking about secular Jews in Israel, and I issued a caveat at the beginning of that, which I'm going to reissue here, which is that clearly there's a gross oversimplification in talking about these 4 tribes, to use President Rivlin's language, and within each of them there's an enormous amount of diversity and disagreement, and the speakers that we bring are, of course, giving their perspective and their analysis. And by all means, you can go online and read and see and hear different analyses from different people. But we do believe that the people that we brought are excellent analysts and excellent observers of the communities of which they themselves are a part. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to say about the particular topic of today, Ultra-Orthodox Jews, Haredi Jews. Just a thing about terminology. In Israel, we talk about the Haredim, the Haredi population. That single term, as we're going to hear, I think, masks a huge diversity within that population. Outside Israel, we tend to talk about Ultra-Orthodox. Our speaker will choose the term he wishes to use, but just to make sure we all know what we're talking about. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for this evening, Rabbi Yehoshua Pfeffer, who is a community rabbi and a rabbinical judge here in Jerusalem, where he lives with his wife and 8 children. He heads the Haredi division of the Tikvah Fund in Israel and also lectures at the Law Faculty of Hebrew University. He's also served as Chief Halachic Assistant to the former Chief Rabbi of Israel and as a researcher for the Israel Law Ministry. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree in law from Hebrew University and also clerked at the Supreme Court of Israel. He's written a number of books and articles in English and Hebrew and he teaches on behalf of the Tikvah Fund and a variety of institutions. So I think you'll agree he is superbly equipped to tackle the topic that we've asked him to tackle this evening. So I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Pfeffer, and then when he's finished speaking, you can write your questions into the chat, and we can go on from there with your questions to him. Rabbi Pfeffer, please.
Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate very much the invitation, and very happy and privileged to be able to address a very illustrious group. Let me just preface that I'm not sure if anybody is actually well equipped to speak about in a half-hour nutshell, 40 minutes, however long I have, to speak about Haredi society, Ultra-Orthodox society in Israel. Like Paul mentioned, it's a very diverse, very varied society that includes a great number of very central and significant groups, and they also pose a huge range of issues concerning the future of Israel, obviously the future of Haredi society, but also the future of the state of Israel and really of the Jewish people. So it's really a tough task for anyone. I'll try to do my best. Let me just tell you how I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to share a screen, and we'll have a presentation that will, try to help me at the beginning to put some facts and figures on your screens, just to understand the magnitude and to understand the scope of the challenge and of the opportunity. And then we'll speak, really briefly about a number of really central and important issues that today are at the center of the discussion, the public debate discussion, and a lot of practical kind of programs, projects, initiatives that involve Haredi society in Israel. And after that, I'm just going to take questions, because I'm sure that you will have a lot to ask on Haredi Ultra-Orthodox society. It really is a kind of topic that many people will have their own impression, their own questions, their own kind of, whether it's based on their own experience or based on things that they've studied. And I'm very happy to also give, a certain slice of time for questions. So with your permission, we'll all stay muted for the time being. I'll give my as short as I can, presentation to try to give the crux of how I see things, and both in an objective way in terms of facts and figures, and in terms of the kind of direction, the vector, where is this going? And then, like I say, I'll be delighted to take questions. Paul, is it okay if you'll be moderating the chat, and then so I won't be having to.
Yeah, that's exactly how we'll do it.
Okay, very good. So let me just share my little presentation, which is over here. Okay, good. Okay, so so I've called this lecture the Haredi Opportunity, facing the challenge of integration. What we have on the screen is a Haredi demonstration from the year 2014. It's also a very memorable, for myself, event, because specifically at this time, I was clerking at the Supreme Court, having finished my law studies at Hebrew U. And part of the demonstration, part of the object of the demonstration was the Supreme Court, meaning Haredim were up in arms. Doesn't make a difference exactly which ruling it was. And they came out officially. This was a prayer. It wasn't, Haredim don't demonstrate, they go out to pray, but it's certainly a kind of tour de force. It's a show of force concerning, both a social force to be reckoned with and a political force to be reckoned with. And, coming out, I remember coming out of the Supreme Court building and thinking, on the one hand, I myself am a Haredi Jew, the rabbi of a community, very much integrated into Israeli Haredi life, my wife, my children, this is where they're growing up. As Paul mentioned, I have 8 children, entirely average for my own community, but this is where I belong. But on the other hand, I myself was working at the time at the Supreme Court, and therefore I had obviously very much mixed feelings about, which side of the fence do I belong to over here. And I hope that by this time you've already located me among this small crowd of people, and that you've managed to pick me out in the picture. Let me first speak then about numbers. As we see in this picture, you see going all the way up here, all the way around here. This is a lot of people, and this is just small demonstration in Jerusalem. But as you can imagine, Haredi society in Israel is really a force to be reckoned with in terms of numbers. Let me just briefly, this is just one very quick picture of the diversity in Haredi society. We don't have to go through all the pictures, it'll take too long, but there's Hasidim, there's Briskers, which is a type of Lithuanian sect. There's the classic Lithuanian, this is Belzer Hasidim, Breslov, the Chalmers, meaning the Yerushalayim, the Gerech Hasid, and so on and so forth. And each one has his own distinctive mode of dress. You'll see that the Gerech Hasidim have these Häusersocken, which is socks over their pants, while the Lithuanians are pretty modern. This is how I dress when I feel like it. This is the Chalmers with the tzitzis, outside the shirt, and obviously the long coat, because they're more kind of traditional. This is the Breslov. They always have a smile. They're often dancing. They have side curls. They have a gartel. The Belzer Hasidim they enjoy having these old-fashioned clocks as a symbol of tradition, and so on and so forth. And each one has a slightly different hat. All these hats are slightly different, and so on. And we haven't even spoken about the Sephardim, the more Eastern Jews, and we haven't got any pictures of women. Haredim don't like pictures of women, so I don't want to offend anyone. I haven't put any on my presentation. But if we would have pictures of women from these different sectors within Haredi society, then also the diversity would be tremendous in all kinds of ways, whether it's in hair covering, in head coverings, and whether it's in the style of clothing and the length, and so on and so forth. So this is just a demonstration of the diversity within Haredi society. Personally, I belong to the Lithuanian group. Those are the yeshivas that I studied in. That's my community. This is where, if you want, my community belonging within Haredi society. And that's also, I suppose, my expertise, if you want, because that's the community I know the best. I'm happy to speak about the others too. I'm well versed. But at the same time, there are many, many nuances that separate between all of these different groups. And therefore, it's really not so easy to speak about what are the common denominators, what's common to all of these groups. And nonetheless, there are commonalities. There are important common denominators to all of these groups, whether you take, the American from Beit Shemesh, who is, nominally Zionist and certainly very modern and works in a very, ordinary Israeli work environment and so on. And still he self-identifies as Haredi, even though when you put him together with, some guy from Mea Sha'arim, the Chalma guy, maybe, these are two extremes. They wouldn't have much to speak about. They would hardly have a common language. And nonetheless, they both self-identify as Haredi. They're both parts of these numbers. Let's have a quick look at these numbers. This is, I apologize for the Hebrew. Next time I'll try to bring an English one. But this is the basic numbers. It's not hard to work it out. The brown percentage figures are the percentages of Haredi society within Israeli society. The blue is the Jews who are not Haredi, and the green at the top, the olive green, is the Arab population in Israel. So if we look at 1980, the Haredim are 4%. If we look at 2015, Haredim are already 11.2%. Today, there's something like 12.5% of the Israeli population. If we go to 2025, these are projected figures, but they're pretty accurate for 2025, for 2035, 2065 is already too far in the future. This is obviously making a prediction based on current trends, which you never know how they might play out. As we know, the further you go into the future, the less accurate we're able to project demographic trends. But one way or the other, there's no doubt as to what's going on in Israel. And, you know, Paul mentioned at the outset President Rivlin's 4 tribes speech. And, you know, with all respect to all the other groups in Israel, there's no question which group in Israel is the one that's really provoking this kind of speech, because the other groups are not really on the move, meaning the Arab population, as you see, pretty much static. The Arab birth rate today, the fertility rate among Arabs is the same as the fertility rate among Jews. And therefore there's no big future surprises in store concerning the size, the relative size of the Arab population. The same is true for the religious Zionist population. You know, they have a slightly higher than average birth rate than the secular Jews in Israel. But, you know, instead of 2, 2.5, 3, so in the religious Zionist world, let's say it's 4 children per mother. In the general, again, the religious Zionist society in Israel also divides into many subgroups, and I won't get into that right now. But the Haredim, this is very clear. The Haredim have a very consistently high birth rates, consistently high fertility rates. Trying to see which is the best graph. This one is not bad. It's not updated till today. Today, the fertility rate for Haredi society has gone back up above 7. It's something like 7.2. It's been consistent between 7, 7.5. It was 6.9 at this stage. Now it's gone up again to 7.1 or 7.2. So it's consistently high. And even though, you know, that famously Netanyahu, as the treasury, as the finance minister of Israel in 2002, made significant cuts in child benefits in Israel. And one of the results that was predicted because of these cuts was a decline in the Haredi birth rate. That didn't happen. There was a steep decline in the Arab birth rate. The Haredi birth rate remained pretty much consistent, remained pretty much the same without any significant difference. And just a quick look at this will show you, you know, the kind of trends that, again, things might change. And I actually think that things will change, are likely to change. But the scope of the change, whether this is a dramatic change or a subtle change, I think it's more likely to be subtle. It's more likely to take a long time. And therefore, without a doubt, Haredi society, the challenge and the opportunity that Haredi society poses within Israel is tremendous today, and it's not going anywhere, meaning, you know, these trends are pretty clear. And if we want to speak about challenges, then, well, the one that I guess is the most discussed is the economic challenge. If you take a quick look at these graphs, well, remarkably, women, Haredi women basically work almost as much as non-Haredi Jewish women. And that's had a tremendous increase over the last couple of decades, predominantly the last 15 years, a really tremendous entry of Haredi women into the general workforce of Israel. That's not to say that Haredi women have the same salaries as non-Haredi women, which is certainly a challenge. But the biggest challenge, without a doubt, is on the left-hand side of our graph, where we find that Haredi men are employed to the tune of 50%. And a lot, something like 2/3 of those 50% are also in internal Haredi occupations, whether it's a teacher in a yeshiva, whether it's a teacher in a primary school, whether it's a job in the rabbinate of some sort, whether it's related to kashrut, whether it's other religiously related occupations, meaning the integration of Haredi men in the general workforce really is way, way below what we would expect for a male adult population. As we see here, non-Haredi Jews, close to 90%. For Haredi Jews, this is 50%. This is as of 2015. I can tell you that today, this has not increased. It's even dropped a bit beneath 50%. It was for a while a bit above 50%. Now it's dropped a bit below 50%. I'm happy to discuss why and how these trends have evolved. But this is to say that this is very challenging. And as we know, Israel, like many other countries in the world, even though it has a very healthy birth rate, Israel generally, irrespective of Haredim, has a very healthy birth rate as compared to other OECD countries. But nonetheless, Israel also had its baby boom in the post-1948 years. That baby boom is now entering retirement age. We also have similar challenges to the rest of the world in this sense. Certainly Europe is a much bigger challenge because of their extremely low birth rates. Ours is higher, but this figure is without a doubt remarkably low and poses a real challenge to the future of Israel's economy. If we think about average income, okay, the previous graph was a representation of participation in the workforce, right? Employment rate of individuals 25 to 64. If we look at the average income based on salaried employment, again, the same range of individuals, then once again, women, so the average income for non-Haredi women is 8,500. Obviously, that also reflects the fact that many women work in less than full-time positions, and therefore it's significantly lower than the male income. There are other reasons also because of choice of occupation, etc., etc. But the Haredi woman has far lower average salary than the non-Haredi woman, and that difference is only augmented. It's only even more extreme when it comes to Haredi men versus non-Haredi men. And again, that is very much a reflection of the choice or the type of occupation. As I mentioned, even within that 50% group of Haredi men who are employed in gainful employment, or at least those that we know about, it's not to say that there are plenty that we don't know about, but the ones that we do know about, so they're working, but the level of their salary is remarkably low by comparison with the non-Haredi male worker. And obviously this is tremendously, tremendously important for Israel's GDP, for Israel's growth. And, let's just put this on the table. Economics, some will say, well, it's only money, it's only economics. Well, let's be honest over here. For Israel, economics isn't just money. It's about defense. It's about being able to face all of the various threats that Israel is threatened by from all of its borders, as well as, of course, managing its society, managing its infrastructures, managing its education and its welfare, and so on, just like every other country. So it's not just money. It's Israel also has a tremendous burden of defense, with a ridiculous percentage of its GDP being spent on defense, way more than any other country in the OECD, including the United States. And therefore, money is meaningful. Let us move on to poverty rates, which again will reflect a very similar situation. Look at this again. I'm not a fan of poverty rates. Happy to put that on the table also. Poverty rates, I don't think, are necessarily the best indication of actual welfare in terms of how well a family is doing, how happy it might be, how well it manages to, close out its month. Poverty rates are not necessarily, poverty rates are relative. They're not necessarily the best measure, but they're the accepted measure. And if we look at Haredi Jews, which is the blue columns, versus non-Haredi Jews, this is just remarkable. In terms of families, over 50% beneath the poverty line, individuals is 60%, children is almost 70%. This is just remarkable figures in terms of the numbers. And when people speak about Israeli poverty, well, this is what we're speaking about. We're speaking predominantly about Haredim, which, again, you might say this is poverty by choice, because if 50% of men are opting out of the workforce, then what do you expect, right? If you're relying on this kind of income that the woman of the household is earning, because as we've seen that women are employed on a much higher scale than men are, then, and you've got 7 or 8 children, this is the average number of children per woman, 7 or 8 children. So, likely you're going to be beneath the poverty line. And again, as I mentioned before, I know many families who are formally beneath the poverty line and nonetheless manage to get on pretty well with less, but nonetheless, it's still remarkable figures. Now, this is a very important statistic, which I think we should be taking into account also. And this is the question of education. Okay, so this is a brief representation of what's going on in higher education. And as we see in the Ultra-Orthodox, this is the Haredi population. So we have women, 15% of Haredi women are earning bachelor degrees or at the very least studied for a bachelor's degrees, and only 8% of Haredi men are studying or have achieved a bachelor's degree. I can tell you that many of those who begin to study for their degrees unfortunately drop out along the way for a variety of reasons, which I'll be happy to discuss later on. But it's really, it's not easy going, even for the ones who make the fairly dramatic step of entering higher education, not easy for them to finish it. And of course, compare that with the Jewish non-Haredi groups, even with the Arab groups, which are far above the Haredim, and of course, the more so with the Jewish. And again, is the only way to becoming wealthy getting a degree? Certainly not. Is the only way of being in gainful employment having a degree? Of course not. But nonetheless, we all know that for many, many jobs, having a degree is the most basic entry point, the most basic requirement for just entering into gainful employment. On some levels, this could be more of an indicator rather than something that you need on a substantive level, but one way or the other, this is how things work. So this is, I think I've discussed up to now, I suppose, a kind of bird's eye view of numbers, statistics, and challenges on the most basic quantifiable level. We can speak about numbers in terms of incomes, in terms of populations, in terms of people getting degrees. We could also speak, of course, about those earning their bagruyot, meaning their matriculation examinations, which are also remarkably low within Haredi society, but not because they can't do it, just because of choice. They don't want to do it, meaning Haredi society, generally, the boys in Haredi society in their schooling system, they stop any kind of general education in 7th grade. Beyond that, they only study Talmudic education from 8th grade and up. So obviously, this is not giving them a firm foundation for entering into higher education, entering into gainful employment, and so on. So again, a lot of that is happening by choice. And this, of course, is part of the challenge. For the next 10, 15 minutes or so, what I'd like to speak about is where that choice comes from. Where do these figures come from? Haredi society isn't just a kind of random and a collection of people who, for some reason, have decided to have many children and to not go to work and so on and so forth, and not to enter higher education. There's a certain system here. There's a certain social understanding. And I'd like to briefly speak about what Haredi society is all about. We've seen the numbers. Let's understand what it's all about. So again, for lack of time, I'm going to kind of bunch together a number of properties, a number of characteristics of Haredi society. And then I'll try to say what I believe is the kind of central motivation, the central, as it were, characteristic that really undergirds the different phenomena, the different types of both sociological and ideological concepts, ideas that are so prevalent within Haredi society. So let's start with the following. Haredi society isn't new to the 20th century. It's not new to post State of Israel. Haredi society was around before. It was around in Eastern Europe. It's been around. However, without a doubt, the types of phenomena that we're seeing here are certainly accentuated in Israel. And the reason for that, I would say, is that if Haredi society was really unable or found it very difficult to flourish in Europe under the kind of tensions of, number one, a very clear and I would say prevalent trend towards secularization, right? All the different trends in Europe of Jewish groups, whether it's the Bund or the socialists or the Zionists and so on, all of these very secularizing influences that were really going through all of the previously Orthodox communities within Europe and bringing out the youth in their, you know, in thousands and tens of thousands, and they were all leaving what came to be known as Haredi society. And of course, Haredi society tried to do its best to protect itself, tried to do its best to raise the boundaries, to erect walls in order to protect its own society from this spiritual decimation as they saw it, but it was very ineffective. It was ineffective because it wasn't provided the kinds of infrastructures, the support, and to do this on its own was extremely difficult. What made this such a success story in Israel is that within Israel, Haredi society had the support of the state itself, right? Ben Gurion, at the inception of the state of Israel, was happy to make a deal with Haredi leadership. And the deal was, we won't disturb you and you shouldn't disturb us. That was the basic gist of the deal, all right? I'm perhaps oversimplifying, but that was the idea. Ben Gurion didn't want Haredi making noise. He wanted a kind of universal acceptance of the state of Israel, a ratification. And the Haredim said, you know what, we'll sign on your document of independence. We're happy to be a part of it, but you have to give us what we want. And, you know, Ben Gurion wasn't so concerned about this. He saw Haredi society as a kind of relic, a relic of the past. You know, the trend around the world was certainly not towards greater religious practice. On the very contrary, it was a trend towards secularization. It was a trend to leaving religion rather than adopting religion. And, you know, this is a few hundred families living in Israel. Ben Gurion didn't have any problem to give them more or less what they wanted. What is it that they wanted? What they really wanted was the capacity to rebuild their own communities, their own yeshiva institutions, their own educational systems, without having to buy in to the model of the new Israeli Jew. They wanted to be allowed to do their job of rebuilding in relative isolation. And Ben Gurion said, fine, you want your own independent educational system, you got it. You want to have deferment from army service for those who are studying in yeshivot, you got it. You want to be able to ensure the religious, the basic religious nature of state institutions in terms of kashrut, in terms of marriage and divorce. Even that, Ben Gurion said, that's fine. I'm happy to go along with that. Meaning these basic ideas and a couple of other things that were included in this initial status quo agreement. And Ben Gurion was happy to do that. And the Haredim were also happy to do that. Meaning the Haredim also were not sure, does the state of Israel have a future? Is this going to be a stable arrangement? This state idea, is this really going to last? And this was a very convenient arrangement, very expedient for both sides. Ben Gurion said, you guys do whatever you want. We'll have this Haredi museum. And the Haredim said, you guys do whatever you want in terms of your nice little state, and we'll build our Torah world, which was destroyed in the Shoah, back to whichever dimensions we'll be able to. And that's what they did, right? The Torah Center, this is one extremely emphasized value within Torah society, within Haredi society, is Torah study. Torah study has become, without a doubt, one of the leading values. Why do all these women go to work? They go to work with a very burning ideology, a passion to support their husband who continues his Torah studies many years after marriage, and sometimes indefinitely, meaning there's it's a system that's based around Torah study on a very deep level. Think of leadership. This is a picture of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, I guess someone told him a good joke over here because he looks especially jovial. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky, one of the most revered leaders today of Haredi society. You don't even join the club of Haredi leadership till you're about 85. And he's well beyond that. So he's well into Haredi leadership. But again, the Haredi leadership model reflects its isolationist concept. You can't really be, with it if you want. When you join the leadership club in your mid-80s, it's a leadership that defines a certain distance, a certain disconnect, a certain being other from the rest of Israeli society. The same is true of the relationship with the state of Israel. This is a nice cartoon from Yated Ne'eman. And every Yom HaAtzmaut, even though Haredim obviously appreciate that life in Israel is better than it was in Eastern Europe, and nonetheless, they keep a distance from the Zionist ideal, from the concept, from the movement, because they are, again, trying to isolate. They're trying to live their lives as much as possible in isolation from the rest of Jewish society, of non-Haredi, of Israeli society. And therefore, over here, this is a classic illustration of, well, here's this Israeli celebrating his Yom HaAtzmaut and doing his little barbecue. But on the one hand, he's changed to the terrorist on the right, and he's changed to whoever it is, Uncle Sam on the left, and Europe holds him down, and so on and so forth. And you guys celebrate. We're going to celebrate the real thing. You can celebrate your little political achievements, and all of these different concepts. Again, I'll think about, just as another example, think about the dress codes. What are these dress codes all about? Why are we dressing, like Eastern Europe, or wearing pajamas on the street like the Neturei Karta guys do? Why are we dressing in such an outlandish way? Let's get with it. What's the point? The point, of course, is to set us aside. This is the underlying theme that really defines what Haredi society is all about. It's about setting us aside from the rest of Israeli society. And like I said, if this was true for Europe, and it's true for the United States, it's the more so true for Israel, because Israel has this added dimension of the new Jew, of Ben Gurion, who wanted to really build not just a state, but also a new model for what it means to be Jewish, a nationalist Jew, a Jew who tolls, who works the fields, a Jew who serves in the army, who's militaristic, and so on and so forth. And Haredi society said, well, you know what? We don't want to be a part of this melting pot. We want to see a continuity from the communities of Eastern Europe and other places, of course, around the globe, to what's going on in Israel. We don't want to break from powerlessness to power, a kind of like Ben Gurion, right? Mitanach lePalmach, going from the biblical era all the way to the Palmach. That was Ben Gurion's motto, and skipping over 2,000 years of exile. Well, the Haredi society didn't want to skip over 2,000 years of exile. They wanted to preserve all of those basic commodities that the Jewish people had picked up over those 2,000 years, and to present a continuity model, a model that continues from those years of exile into the state of Israel, as it were. Again, no one can pretend that it's a direct continuation. Without that, the Shoah made an impact, but to try as much as possible to rehabilitate, to rebuild based on that previous model. And that's the idea of this dress code. This dress, there's nothing inherently sanctified about these, long Hasidic coats. I mean, I call them Hasidic because I don't know anybody else who wears them nowadays, but once upon a time, everybody used to wear them. This was, your Eastern European average guy's dress code, and the idea of preserving it is really to be separate, to be different, and that's also the Torah study. Torah study doesn't have to be Torah study the whole day long for your whole life, but if you do that, then you're definitely different, right? And the same thing is true of the leadership model of this is just a small demonstration of the Israeli draft law, which is an attack on our freedom of religion. Go to jail rather than join the Zionist army. Obviously, these are extremists. I think they're even in no, they're not. These ones are not. Sometimes they come out in sackcloth and ashes to demonstrate just how upset they are about this. But again, what is the issue of serving in the IDF? You're being protected by these soldiers. Why not serve in the IDF? Well, the answer for Haredi society is that serving in the IDF means effectively joining the Israeli melting pot experiment, joining the Israeli melting pot idea that we all come together with one culture, with one vision of what the new Jew, the new Israeli Jew is all about. And Haredim don't want to take part in that. And that's really been the underlying theme, the underlying definition of what it means to be a Haredi Jew. And even the Jew in Beit Shemesh, who is much more Zionist, and he's much more modern, and he's much more integrated, but nonetheless, he still espouses this isolationist idea, at the very least when it comes to culture. He also doesn't want his kids to be growing up with smartphones. He doesn't want to have Justin Bieber playing on his children's iPods. He doesn't want to be exposed to all of the latest, whatever it is, Netflix series, which involves, from his perspective, promiscuity and a moral capitulation to all of the latest fads in Western values and alternative family models and so on and so forth. Even the most modernizing Haredi person in Beit Shemesh refuses to, as it were, allow that exposure to enter into his life. And that's what really makes him Haredi, even though on many levels he doesn't have a common language with these guys, the extremists that you see in your picture, but on some levels he does, because he too espouses a model of isolationism. And if you want, you know, there are other religious people in the world that have similar values. Other religious people also certainly study a lot of Torah. Indeed, some secular Jews strongly espouse Torah study. This is not exclusive to Haredim, but what really separates between the Haredi model and the non-Haredi model, whether it's modern Orthodox, religious Zionist, and so on, is the isolationist trend, the isolationist tendency. For the Haredim, the response to modernity is a response of isolationism. We don't want to take the risk. We don't want to bring in all of that secular culture, all of that secular culture and a vision of what Judaism is, a different vision of what Judaism is. An alternative model would be to say, well, yes, let's be together with everyone else, but let's try to educate our children that they'll be strong enough to withstand the different temptations of secular culture and the different models of what it means to be a Jew. Haredi society says, no, we don't want to take that risk. We prefer the isolationist model, which might have its drawbacks, but it certainly has a strong advantage. And I think that advantage is certainly borne out in numbers, meaning, you know, a lot of people are remaining, many people bought into the Haredi model over the years, and those who did buy in, or those who are born into Haredi society, will generally stay there. The rates, the dropout rates, they're not zero, but they're also not high. They're certainly far lower than the parallel dropout rates in religious Zionist or modern Orthodox society. Let me end with questions of current trends, because many of you, I trust, will remember this strange contraption. This is an antenna, and it's the type of thing that we used to have on our roofs when we used to watch television in a normal way. Nowadays, of course, we no longer have these contraptions, and this has made a tremendous difference to Haredi society. Why? Because so long as you needed an antenna on your roof to be able to watch television, so it was very easy for Haredi society to handle the threat of TV. TV is obviously a tremendous threat because it brings into your living room everything that's bad or good or neutral from the surrounding society, right? You have a TV set, you're exposed. However, anyone that belonged to a Haredi community and had an antenna on his roof could immediately be ostracized. His children wouldn't be admitted to the schools. He wouldn't get an aliyah in shul, and so on and so forth. He could be ostracized by the society, and therefore the battle against television was a tremendous success for Haredi society. They were able to really define in very bold colors that anyone with a TV set is simply not Haredi. You can't be Haredi and have a TV set. Obviously, today, that's entirely different. Today, you can have a router in some hidden closet, and you can be watching any kind of TV show in your bedroom computer or whatever it is, and nobody knows about it. Meaning today, obviously, with internet, the challenge of isolation is far, far more difficult, far, far more complicated than it was with TV. The more so because internet isn't just about entertainment. Internet is also about basic function. It's about making an appointment with a doctor. It's about going to the post office. And it's also about working. Anyone who works actually needs to have internet on some level. So of course you can recommend, or you can even try to enforce screening, but nonetheless, it's a real uphill battle. It's a difficult, it's a real tough one to contain. And it's not just about the internet. Haredi society as a 500, 600, 700 family strong society in 1948, well, they could really isolate, meaning it was okay for them to live their own lives, to try to rebuild their own broken, fractured institutions, communities, Hasidic courts, and so on and so forth. But when you're a 1.1 or 1.2 million body people, when you're 12, 13% of the Israeli population and growing, then it's a very different story. Such a huge population can't by any degree isolate on the same level as a 500, 600 family population. And when you're that big, you're by definition involved. You're involved politically, of course, as Haredi society really has always been, but of course today with significant power. Haredi society wields a lot of political power, but beyond the politics of it, on a social level, Haredi society is getting more and more integrated the whole time. Number one, because almost all of Haredi society has moved into speaking Hebrew, and being a Hebrew-speaking society naturally means that over the generations, you gravitate towards a greater identification with your host country, with Israel. They're speaking modern Hebrew, they're exposed on a certain level to Israeli culture, and you just become more and more Israeli. But at the same time, there's also a tremendous internal pressure. When you're so big a society, you can't be isolated on a financial level, on an economic level. Where's the money going to come from? Internal positions of teaching and so on have run out several decades ago. And now whether you're a Haredi woman looking for employment in order to feed the family, or whether you're a Haredi man, in the past, the successful men in Haredi society would become, the Rosh Yeshiva or teachers in yeshiva institutions and so on. And those who didn't make it, well, never mind, they could become Knesset members. Now that's not the case anymore. Those who don't make it in Haredi society, in the base medrash environment, in the study hall, they really don't have much alternatives. And this leads to a lot of frustration. It leads to a lot of disillusionment. And therefore, people are looking for new options. People are looking for broader scope, whether it's in employment or in education or in higher education and so on. And that's why over the last couple of decades, there have been tens, if not hundreds, of academic colleges that have sprouted up across the country to provide higher education for Haredim. And the same thing is true of workforce participation. Yes, the growth is still not very high, but it has gone up. It's gone up from about 35% about 15 years ago to 50% today. It's stagnated, and there are issues there that still need to be resolved. But nonetheless, the overall trend is certainly a trend towards greater integration with Israel. And I think that to leave you with for the following question, because it's late and I'm aware of the need to give you time to answer, to give me time to answer your questions. So I'll leave you with this thought. And I think that today, the greatest question for Haredi society is to think about how we will be able to, on the one hand, allow ourselves greater space to integrate into Israeli society. We need it internally in Haredi society. And of course, Israel needs it on every level. It's not just about economics. It's about the social cohesion of Israel. And it's about the national spirit. If Israel is to continue being the political representative of the Jewish people, then Haredi society needs to be a part of it, needs to have some chelek, some part in Israel as that political representative. But at the same time, Haredi society needs to figure out how, on the one hand, they can join, be a part of be involved with and integrated into Israeli society on a much broader and deeper level, while at the same time not losing, not giving up those qualities that Haredi society has been so successful at developing and preserving over the decades since the inception of the State of Israel. And obviously, Haredi society is in two minds about this. There are groups within Haredi society who are pro-integration. There are groups who are these reactionary groups that will say, chas v'shalom, if we'll go towards integration, if you're going to be studying in a college or working in a secular, in some kind of a secular organization or company, then what makes you Haredi? Then what makes you a part of this isolating, militantly isolating group? And therefore, there are these conflicting trends today within Haredi society. I myself am very involved in this issue. I set up a journal called Tzarich Iyun to discuss these topics. I've been involved in academic studies on one level, in setting up yeshivas that also integrate general studies on another level, and so on and so forth. But I'm very cognizant of the challenges involved. I think Haredi society ultimately has been able to develop a lot of very positive characteristics that I think it can actually donate a lot. It can actually be, as it were, a positive influence for the rest of Israel. However, before it can become that, it needs to be able to articulate what it has. It has to be able to enter into this more general space, this general discussion, and to really become a, as it were, equal partner in a civic responsibility sense for the State of Israel. That's happening. It's happening a bit slow. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm going to leave it there. I hope that this has been a brief but instructive introduction into the challenges and the opportunities of Haredi society. Let me end off by saying that if we care about Israel and the Jewish people, then we should care about this issue. It's a big issue. It's a central issue for the future of Israel, for the future of the Jewish people. The demographics speak for themselves, and at the same time, we should, be thinking, number one, about how to integrate Haredim, but number two, how to allow Haredim to preserve all that they see as being good and beautiful about their own society, and what it can actually give, which goods can it actually share with the rest of Israel in a positive sense.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Pfeffer. Can I ask you to turn off the screen share?
I'm turning it off right now.
Okay, so let me say first that often when we have a presentation, it requires some sort of time to encourage people to ask questions, and maybe I'll have to ask a question of my own in order to warm people up. That has not been the case. There's a lot of questions. What I want to do, I'm aware of time, and with your permission, Rabbi Pfeffer, we may go a bit over the hour. And if people want to stay for that extra 10, 15 minutes, then they can. I'm going to try and group together some of the questions around some common themes, and then questions that are on very specific issues I hope to get to as well. You touched on the end a point about what you yourself are involved in, and there were a few questions about your own background. I didn't mention in my introduction of you that you made Aliyah from the UK, hence your excellent, and may I say wonderfully British accented English, no bias on my part. Can you say a little bit about sort of how does your background as someone that made Aliyah, that came from outside Israel, how has that impacted the fact that you have pursued this decidedly unusual path in the Haredi community in terms of secular education, clerking in the Supreme Court, all those kinds of things, and whether that's something that gives you either puts you at a disadvantage in terms of how you're perceived within the community, or an advantage because you're able then to push along reforms because of your because of what you know and what you've been.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to speak about myself, but only very briefly.
Yeah, let's keep it short, just because there's other things to talk about. But I want to I want to have that.
Of course. So let me just say the following. I came here when I was 17 after finishing high school in England, and I very quickly, I literally fell in love with the Haredi system in Israel. I admired the self-sacrifice. I admired the totality of it. I admired the potential to be so immersed in your Torah studies that you don't know what's going on outside the yeshiva. I didn't know the street names literally. For a good number of years, I was so immersed in the Torah study, in trying to become a Torah scholar. And even after marriage, I continued my studies for a good number of years. I became a rabbinical judge and so on. There came a time, and I think that certainly, being a kind of immigrant, as it were, literally to Israel and to Israeli Haredi society, does allow you to have a different kind of perspective. It allows you a little bit to, take a step back, as it were, and to look at your own surroundings from a different angle, to see things that people who have grown up within the system might not always be able to see. I'm not saying this is not special for myself or for immigrants to Haredi society. I think it's true for immigrants everywhere. And from my perspective, there were a few things that I was grappling with. First of all, having been online, just because I had to send my halachic articles into different publications that I was writing for and so on. So I was exposed to this very great tension, even animosity between the Haredim and the rest of Israeli society. That was deeply disturbing for me. I wasn't used to that from England. It was for me something which I felt, something needs to be done, or at the very least, to be researched on a personal level. I wanted to understand this more. Why is there such tension? Why is there such animosity? Is there something that could be done about it? This is surely not the way things should be. So that was one thing that I found disturbing. Another thing was, of course, just to see, from my own contemporaries, my friends in Kollel, which is a post-marriage learning institution, and others, I saw a lot of frustration. I saw a lot of the kind of drawbacks alongside the many beautiful things and many things that I still find very admirable about Haredi society. But I did begin to see the different drawbacks and different things that I felt are challenges that need to be dealt with on some level. And I just felt that I would have better tools for dealing with all of these kinds of issues if I would broaden my own horizons first. And that's why I decided to enter into Hebrew University and to get a degree, and to just kind of, alongside my Torah study, today I'm still a community rabbi, but nonetheless, I felt that having this broader, number one, education, and number two, exposure to Israel, having friends who are outside of Haredi society, being a part, having a leg in both these worlds, as it were, would both enrich me personally, but also, and perhaps more importantly, be able to position myself and give me the tools to do things that would be more unique, if you want, a more unique contribution. Not that being a rabbinical judge and so on isn't nice. I enjoyed it and it was great. But nonetheless, I think there are others that could do the job pretty well also. While I felt that having grown up in England and having, this ability to kind of bridge between different communities and to, think on a different level about the kind of challenges that we need to face within Haredi society, I felt that I might be able to contribute something more unique. And I think that's basically been the way things have played out. Obviously, nothing like how I envisage or plan them, but it's never quite how you envisage it. You sow the seeds and God has his roots, and it's never quite as you plan it. But I have been involved in many very productive and very fruitful initiatives and projects and so on. And I'm trying to do my best, within my little corner of the world.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to read a couple of comments, which are sort of they're essentially critiques. So I'm obviously I don't want to add to the animosity. Certainly not personally, but I think that there's
no, Paul, critiques are fine, and they can be said forcefully. They can be respectful, but they should be said forcefully.
Okay.
and it's absolutely fine.
Okay,
just
so
go ahead.
no one has written anything that I think is uncivil or anything that is outside of the bounds. But some of it's sharply worded, and I think that's legitimate because these are issues which affect the way people address real issues and real concerns that people have. So I'm going to read a couple of comments. One says that so you talked about the isolationism and you explained where it comes from. The need to isolate from the rest of society, Israeli society. It says, on the one hand, Haredi Jews reject a lot about modern society. On the other hand, they are willing to benefit from modern developments in medicine, pharmaceuticals, fertility treatments, etc., security, the IDF. Is there not a discussion in the Haredi world about the dissonance between these two things, between the isolationism and the fact that actually means they're benefiting from the society?
Paul, is that as sharp as you can get? I mean,
I can go sharp if you want. I can even sharpen it myself. But
that was not very impressive. I mean, I was bracing myself for something that, you know. Well, again, Haredi society has been accused of a certain hypocrisy, meaning on the one hand, refusing to serve in the IDF, but certainly enjoying the benefits of those who serve in the IDF. Refusing to serve in the army, but sending politicians into the Knesset who make decisions on behalf of those who do serve in the army. So isn't that hypocrisy? Isn't that something which is morally bankrupt? And let me preface and say the following. I think that, you know, I'm not even sure if in your question you mentioned the army, you mentioned a bunch of other things about modern society. I think the army is a much bigger question. I think, you know, benefiting from good inventions of modernity, you know, is that a moral dilemma? Meaning, you know, we're not a part of that, but we do benefit from that. Well, you know, you could say that Haredi society they see themselves, and by the way, this is very much true. Haredi society sees itself in many ways as a kind of Shevet Levi, meaning they're providing a spiritual backbone for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. They're the ones who are carrying the torch of tradition, as it were, and therefore this exempts them in a certain sense from an intense participation in the development of modern society. Haredi society, of course, they're not Amish. They don't refuse to participate. They even get vaccinated, most of them, and they certainly use computers and so on. But they are providing, in their own eyes, a tremendous benefit for the state of Israel in their spiritual work, in their Torah study, and so on. The question, of course, the big question in my eyes is the army, because army service, you know, and at the end of the day, you know, you've got the mother of a non-Haredi Jew who has to lose sleepless nights over the fate of her son in some military campaign. Whereas the Haredi mother sleeps well at night with her son in the yeshiva, safely protected by non-Haredi soldiers. And I think that's a real moral question, meaning, and I don't have a good moral answer for that. The answer that I have for that is that Haredi society is prepared to pay the moral price because of its perception that entry into the IDF would effectively mean the end of Haredi society. Is that entirely true? Is the army today the same as it was in the 1950s and the 60s? Is secular society the same threat that it used to be? Are the threats today the same as they used to be, or have they shifted? And should that, in response, also lead to a shift in strategy on the part of Haredi society? All these are big questions, and they're being discussed. It's not like there's no discussion. There is discussion. I will say that most of this discussion is taking place on a kind of bottom-up kind of level, which is very interesting. It's less trickling down from Haredi leadership, wherever we want to place it, but more from within the rank and file of Haredi individuals. Of course, some of these discussions are just happening on internet forums here and there, which don't have much significance. Some of them can actually lead to real implications in the field. But these are issues, they are being discussed. And ultimately, I think that, I'm also on the executive board of Netzach Yehuda, which is an organization that provides support for Haredi soldiers. So I know the kind of challenges that Haredi soldiers face. I know it's not black and white. It's a complicated issue. It's a nuanced issue. I'm deeply involved. I know what's going on there, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I think
we actually had a specific question about Haredi soldiers. From one of our audience, Jeff Daub, who's associated with the Lone Soldier Center.
Wonderful.
And he mentions that there are a significant number of Haredi lone soldiers who've been ostracized from their families and communities. And he wants to know whether you think there's a greater or lesser acceptance of IDF service than there was a few years ago. Right. And is there a predictable trend in either direction?
It's a good question. The truth is that there's a trend in both directions. On the one hand, there's a far greater acceptance today than there was 15 years ago. In many communities where it was less accepted, again, when it was just starting out, in the 60s and the 70s, it was still very normal for Haredim to do army service. Then it became very, very exceptional. And then over the last couple of decades, the kind of Netzach Yehuda battalion has been reformed, and it's become more normal for Haredim to serve in the IDF. I have to say, this is a certain brand of Haredim. You don't have your Bachelor from Panovich going to serve in the IDF. You don't have your Bachelor from Hebron. These are the leading yeshivas, the leading yeshivot in Israel. Those are not your classic profile of a guy that's going to join the IDF. It's generally the guy that hasn't made it in the Haredi system. He's dropped out. They've tried everything else. Nothing's worked. He's found his way to the street, and then he's been picked up and said, why don't you, get a life, start functioning, and do some rehab in the IDF. That's more or less the kind of profile. Again, it's not exclusive. And there are many wonderful boys who come into the army from Haredi society for all kinds of reasons. But again, it's your average profile is not your, successful Bachur from an elite yeshiva. And naturally, those who do make it to the IDF from Haredi society have issues. Some of them have issues of lone soldiers or families that are not prepared to who cut them off, as it were. Others have a lot of different kinds of issues because, just the journey from Haredi society to the IDF is radical. This is not secular society or non-Haredi society, that it's a well-trodden path and a path that you're educated towards and that you're prepared for many years. Haredim are not prepared for this. They don't have the kind of tools, whether it's emotional or whether it's religious and so on, to deal with this kind of sudden entry into a completely different and very challenging environment. And therefore, there are many challenges for Haredi soldiers. Family is one of them. And like I said, on the one hand, there's more acceptance. On the other hand, there are a number of radical groups, extremist groups that have emerged over the past few years as a kind of, like I mentioned, reactionary movement because of this greater openness. So there's also been this reactionary kind of movement towards greater militant Haredism, militant isolationism. And one of the key issues of that isolationism has been the relationship with the army, meaning these groups will say, don't just reject service in the IDF, but don't even collaborate, don't cooperate with the government or with the army in terms of getting deferments. We don't even speak to you guys. There's no connection between us. So there are conflicting trends over here. I think generally speaking, there has been a significant growth. One of the slides on the presentation that I didn't get to show was a slide of last year's Memorial Day event, Haredi Memorial Day, which was attended by 1,000 people. It was a tremendous, I think, Kiddush Hashem, that we're a part of this. We're a part of the Memorial Day for fallen soldiers. We respect that sacrifice and we're a part of it. And I think that, the way that was given attention on some of the Haredi new media outlets, meaning the kind of news outlets that are online, some of them are tremendously popular. It got a lot of attention, and it's a sign of changing attitudes, of a dynamic that's taking place. The fact that these Memorial Day services within Haredi society are becoming prevalent and well attended is significant.
Okay, great. So I want to ask something that's kind of building on a few questions that have been asked. If we look at the political situation and the way this plays out in Israeli politics. It seems to me that you have on the one hand political parties and figures who are very much trying to push a top-down, essentially coercive change in the Haredi society with regard to whether it's army service or some kind of national service that isn't army service, but some, finding yeshivot that don't have a certain percentage going to the army, that kind of thing, and also enforcing changes in educational standards by stopping funding for Haredi schools that aren't teaching core subjects, that kind of thing. And on the other hand, you'll have parties that say we need to keep the status quo because the Haredi parties are supporting them and they're reliant on the Haredi parties for support, and therefore they don't want to make any changes at all. And to listen to you, one gets the picture of a sort of gradual bottom up changes which people like you are trying to influence. And I guess my question to you is, my guess is that you're opposed to this sort of top-down coercive stuff from parties like Yesh Atid, let's say. On the other hand, your presentation with the charts and other things shows that there is actually some level of urgency to change because of the rising population, what it means for the economy, and that sort of thing. So where do you stand on that? Do you think there's a place for a more sort of, a more sort of top-down coercive, we need to make these changes now? Or do you think that's a really bad way to go and a sort of, what's the word? A counterproductive, thank you, a counterproductive measure.
Well, I would, with permission from the illustrious audience, I would quote the Beatles on this one, who said the marvelous sentence of, I'll get by with a little help from our friends. I think that coercion has proven to be a route that has not been productive. Again, it was attempted on different levels. What it actually did was to move us back a number of years in terms of whether it was in terms of army service or in terms of general integration and so on. And this is something which happens now and again. I think it's unfortunate that you have some politician that wants to, as it were, gain popularity by engaging in Haredi bashing, as it were, and speaking about coercion, whether it's in terms of education or in terms of army service and so on. And what it does is that it internally within Haredi society, it just gives a lot of strength. It gives a lot of power to those reactionary forces, to those reactionaries and extremists who say, well, I told you so. I told you that you can't trust government, that you can't trust, non-Haredi Israel. What they really had to do is to make us less Haredi and to bring us closer to secularism and so on and so forth. And it just, in the end, the attempts at moving things by coercion have been counterproductive, and I think they will be counterproductive. But having said that, a little help from my friends, meaning there are trends within Haredi society that are very positive, and government can certainly be involved on a number of levels, whether it's local government level or national government, in trying to strengthen, in trying to bolster those very important trends, whether it's in education, higher education, even in army service. There are important trends, but they do need attention. They do need support. They do need infrastructure. They do need financial support. And even that is very difficult for government to provide because of the political arrangement, because of the political system. The Haredi parties are not necessarily on board. Well, I think that's not a harsh enough statement. They are almost necessarily not on board with these kinds of trends. They are generally, pandering is maybe not a nice word, but they are generally representing the more hardline groups within Haredi society. that's what they feel that their mission is. It depends exactly which party, depends exactly which representative, and certainly they've done some good things also. But in the internal Haredi, as it were, battle, discussion, argumentation between these different forces, the Knesset members are very, very conservative on this. They see their role as a very, as a quite narrow role in the traditional space of making sure that the yeshivot get funding, making sure that those who are in full-time Torah study are able to get by, and so on and so forth. They're less into the general civic picture that a lot of the more kind of integrating, or those Haredi who are more involved with non-Haredi society on a deeper level are. And therefore, because the Haredi political parties have such a say, such a strong presence in Israeli politics, it's difficult to get anything done on a government level. And therefore, generally speaking, I place greater trust and reliance on the private sector, to be entirely honest, meaning on private initiative from the people themselves. And if they need funding, they'll be able to find it from philanthropy, which still needs to perhaps get on board on a certain level with the importance, with the gravitas, but is slowly understanding that this is a big issue that needs also some significant support. And I don't know, maybe it's a certain naivety, but I have confidence in the people. I'm definitely optimistic. If you ask me, how do I look at the future? I'm a big optimist. I think that the future is rosy. I think it's good. I think we haven't gotten, that's an Americanism, but we haven't gotten to where we are now just to throw in the towel and to give up. We've gone a long way, and we can go a much longer way. And I think that Haredi society will get on board, on their own terms and in their own way. But provided we have the right people who are going to be involved and active in finding and establishing these institutions and these initiatives and so on, then that's what it's all about. And I think it's happening. I'd like to see it happening even more, but you can't have it all. But at the same time, overall, I think there are very important things that are being done. And government is a player, but I don't think it's necessarily the main player.
Okay, we're quite a bit over time, but I want to just finish on one last question, just because it was mentioned and it hasn't come up, and it's quite a big issue in Israel right now, which is the question of coronavirus, and the perceived or real culpability of the Haredi population in the rise in numbers of infections, the seeming violation of the rules by some, certainly not all, but by some sectors of the Haredi population. I think I'm right in saying, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that when there was the first time that Israel was dividing the country into the sort of hotspots, the areas, the red zones, I believe that almost all of them were either Haredi or Arab. I think that was the case, at least after it's sort of around the summertime, beginning of the summertime. Can you comment on that, whether you agree with some of the criticism, whether you completely disagree, whether you're somewhere in between?
Well, I think that the COVID-19 period has really allowed us some very sharp insights into the kind of challenges that Haredi society really provides or really raises concerning the future of Israel. And more than anything else, and we could speak about this for a long time, and we're not, obviously, but more than anything else, I think that the kind of response that we saw from large parts of Haredi society has demonstrated the degree to which many within Haredi society see themselves, or see their communities, as a kind of state within a state, as a kind of autonomy within the state of Israel. And that means, again, no one is delusioned enough to believe that Haredim can be an autonomy. Obviously, they rely on the same infrastructures, the same MRI machines, the same electricity grids and so on. They're not autonomous by any sense. But by autonomy, I mean in terms of managing their own affairs. When it comes to the internal management of Haredi affairs, Haredi society considers itself to be autonomous. And as it were, that was more or less, like I mentioned, the kind of status quo agreement with Ben Gurion that allowed Haredim this sense of autonomy of managing their internal affairs in terms of geographics, where they live, in terms of their education system and so on, in terms of their religion and their practice and their synagogues and so on and so forth. And usually this just doesn't raise too much trouble because it's basically arranged in a legal way. Again, the army issue has come to the Supreme Court several times, specifically because it wasn't arranged in a robust legal framework, and it was just, you know, sporadic decisions made by the defense minister rather than something that was anchored in law. And that's why it's been to the Supreme Court so often as a real troubling issue. But generally, most issues, okay, Haredim have their autonomy, but that's just the way it is. And we're used to it. And these things are anchored in custom, if not in law. What happened in Corona is that suddenly we had this new issue that wasn't anchored anywhere. There's no law, there's no status quo, there's nothing that tells us about how to react to a pandemic. And all of a sudden, the government was telling Haredi society, you've got to close your schools, you've got to close your synagogues, you've got to close your yeshivot, you've got to seize your most precious religious activities that define what it means to be a Haredi person. That means that you don't serve God alone in a kind of Protestant individual way, but rather with a community in a synagogue. You learn Torah not on your own at home, but rather together with everyone else. Now, it's, of course, in an emergency situation, you can daven at home, you can pray in your living room, and you can learn Torah wherever you are. But the very concept of government telling Haredi society how to manage its own affairs, that was a bitter pill for Haredi society to swallow. And that's really a lot. Again, there's much more. There's a lot of detail here that I'm not going to be able to go into. But that, I think, is like the underlying theme of why it was so difficult for Haredi society to comply on many levels with the government directives. And, you know, they got into line now and again, and then all of a sudden there was something else. For the Hasidim, it was, well, how can we not be with the Rebbe on the Yom Noraim, on Yom Kippur? How can we not be with the Rebbe? That's part of our religion. And for the Litvish, it was more the yeshivot and the boys' schools for Torah study and so on and so forth. So each one had his kind of watershed moment where the question was, well, that's too much of an encroachment on our autonomy, on our own authority. And we understand why government is making these decisions, but government doesn't have the same kind of considerations to make that we have. And when we make the considerations, then we come up with something else. But I think it was a real test, it was a real trial, and it was a real moment in terms of, you know, as it were, revealing this kind of beneath the surface understanding, this state within a state understanding that is just so meaningful. Who does have authority? What is our civic responsibility? A pandemic, you can't just say, well, we're going to stand alone and be isolated, because what we do influences the entire country. And therefore all these considerations are suddenly raised in such an intensive way. It's been a productive time, I think, in terms of raising these issues, raising these considerations and engaging them in a deep way. Certainly in my journal in Tzarech Iyun, which has a slight English version. It's obviously mainly in Hebrew, but it has an English version. We've had many articles about, you know, different elements within the Corona crisis, and we're not done yet. Please God, we'll be done soon.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Rabbi Pfeffer, for all of your time and your comments, and for, I think, really educating us on a whole range of issues, and I think also the work that you're doing within Haredi society is something which I think is important for the whole of Israel, and whatever views that people have, and I think we can see from the questions that people have some very strong views on this topic. I think that, you know, like the Haredi community is not only not going anywhere, but it's growing, as you said, and therefore the need to find a way to reach a modus vivendi and to bring the Haredi community into a greater engagement, a positive engagement with the rest of the state of Israel is a necessity and an urgent one. And I thank you for all that you do in that regard.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you to everyone. I just want to apologize. I'm sure there've been many comments. I'm unfortunately not following the chat because I'm busy speaking. However, you know, if there's anyone that wants to give me some of that fair stuff that I understand Paul is shielding from me, then I'm fine. Don't worry about my feelings. I'm really happy to address all this stuff. And Paul, I'm happy to, you know, you can give my contact information. I try to be available. So anyone that hasn't received answers to his burning questions, by all means, feel free to be in touch.
Okay, so
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Pfeffer. Again, thank you, everyone. We're back next week with part 3 of this series. We're going to be looking at the Dati Leomi community, the religious Zionist community. Those of you who are not on my mailing list and would like to be, drop me an email at paulg@begincenter.org.il. Also, drop me a line if you want Rabbi Pfeffer's details, as he's kindly offered. And I wish everyone a Chag Sameach for the last remaining days of Hanukkah. Sorry, and admonishment from the rabbi there. And I wish you all well, and I'll see you next week, I hope. Bye.
Bye.